Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, and thank you for joining today's webinar, Conversations with Global Leaders, COVID-19 and the Global Economic Outlook. This panel is hosted by the NYU AD Alumni Association, with many thanks to John Pine for organizing us, and it is one of our events celebrating the 10th anniversary of NYU Abu Dhabi. This session is being recorded, and that we do that so that we can make it available on our website soon. Many people have been tapping into these conversations I've been having with our alums. Come to them a little bit later in this very busy time of the year. Our series of conversations with global leaders brings together small groups of fantastic NYU AD graduates who are making a difference in their communities, their organizations, their countries, and the world. I am Mariët Westermann, the Vice Chancellor of NYU Abu Dhabi, and I want to thank you for joining us today for what I think will be a very engaging conversation on a crucial topic of our time. But first, let me assure you, our alums, that all through this incomparably difficult year, NYU AD has managed to continue to do what we were created to do, and what you came to us for. We've continued to educate and equip a next generation of leaders with knowledge and methods for seeking truth, so that they may live lives of civic contribution and personal fulfillment. And here at NYU AD, this year, as in any other year, our students don't just want to do well, although they do, they also want to do good. Our students have continued to do so this year on your campus and everywhere NYU AD students are to be found, online and on the ground. And you, our alumni, are, of course, doing so every day. You live and breathe the mission of NYU Abu Dhabi on your journeys in 80 or more countries now. It is such an honor to have 4 of your cohort of 1,400 with us today, to discuss economic topics of pressing concern. How do we recover from a devastating economic downturn that has seen greater job losses than at the worst time in the Great Recession of 2008 to 2010? How will we ever compensate for the reality that health challenges and disease, as well as economic losses of the pandemic, have hit hardest in the lowest income and most vulnerable communities? How do we not only recover economically, but build a new type of world economy that is more equitable than the ever more unequal one that we had even 11 months ago? Our amazing panelists come to us from 3 different countries today, 4 different places. So let's meet them in order before we start our conversation. And I will ask them to unmute their mics and show us and get their cameras going so that you can meet them in person or reconnect with them if you've known them all along. We'll start with Lola, please. Would you introduce yourself? Hi there.
Hi, Mariët. Thank you so much. I'm very excited to be here today. My name is Lola, or Maria Dolores for the longer version. I graduated from NYU Abu Dhabi in 2019. I am originally from Madrid, Spain, and I am currently in Dubai. I work as an investment analyst at VentureSouk, which is a venture capital firm based out of Dubai. And we invest in technology startups globally. So my role there is twofolded. I look at 2 types of startups, ones that are very early with what we call seed stage globally, and then another set of startups that aim to generate positive social and environmental impact, also at a rather early stage.
Very exciting. Thank you and welcome. Let's turn to Yumi.
Hi there, I'm Yumi. It's great to be here. I graduated in 2018, currently located in Abu Dhabi in my apartment since March. home is Cleveland, Ohio in the US. And I'm currently a consultant at Booz Allen Hamilton, which is a consulting firm originally from the US. We have a presence out in MENA. And before I go any further, I just want to note that anything that I say today in this panel is a reflection of my personal views and does not necessarily reflect the position of the company. But I mainly do a lot of work more in the public sector with organizational transformation or strategy development, that kind of thing.
Well, welcome, Yumi. And now we'll hear from Abhijay, please. Hi.
Hi, Mariët. Great to be here. I have to start this with saying I saw someone I recognized on the Zoom call. I messaged them. Turns out it went to everybody. So that was a yo from me. Hi, my name is Abhijay Garg, and I am from New Delhi, India. I am currently based out of London, and I graduated in the NYU Abu Dhabi class of 2016. I studied computer science there. Like I said, I'm currently based in London, and I work here at Accenture Strategy as a strategy consultant. I've been here for the last 4 years. In my role, I help essentially the largest companies in the world, name the Fortune 500 companies, figure out how in this world of digital disruption, and well, this year, the disruption driven by the pandemic, how do they actually grow their business, and how do they keep doing what they've set out to do, not just doing right by their shareholders, but also by the communities that they serve. I think similar to Yumi, I have to give a disclaimer that everything I'm saying as part of this panel is strictly my own opinion and doesn't really reflect any opinions or thoughts from my employer. But thank you. It's great to be here. Great
to see you. And Yero, let's hear the view from Dakar.
Yes, hi everyone. My name is Yero. I'm from Dakar, Senegal. I was in Abu Dhabi up until a few weeks ago. Yes, I'm working currently with a startup that's based in Singapore, and I graduated in NYU AD in 2019. And before I go on, I just wanted to send a big friendly hug to the entire NYU AD community, alums or students alike, because I could not imagine myself studying under these circumstances while being back in NYU. It's a crazy time, and so I just wanted to send that love out there to everyone who needs it. And I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to be talking about this topic, which is extremely relevant going forward, because 2020 has hit us from pretty much all sides. Also, I'm really glad to be here, and I'm excited.
It's so true. Well, thank you. We need hugs. We can't give many of them physically these days, but we will be back to that moment at some point. So thank you so much for recognizing the challenges of being a student today. It truly is difficult, even though, as I said, your successors are also doing an incredible job keeping their academic journeys alive and well. And just, can you say a little bit about the company that you work for, the business you're in?
Yes. So before working for that startup, I started by working in Abu Dhabi with an investment firm that invested mostly in the education, in the healthcare and financial services sector, and that had a portfolio that was both largely based in the UAE and the Gulf region at large, and in Egypt as well, and also had a few portfolio companies based in Europe as well. So the company's was based in Abu Dhabi, but also had offices in Dubai, in DC, and in London. And right after that, I because of the pandemic, which again has shown me that this year was one of the toughest personally as an adult, because I graduated very recently, so it's still very new to me. I started working with a startup that was co-founded by one of our NYU AD alumni from the class of 2018. And so my role there was to be in business development, and so helping the startup gain more traction because of the potential connections that I already had in the venture capital world. And so we offer machine learning solutions to private equity funds, family offices, that type of stuff, and we help them sort of better their insights when they go into their own M&A deals, and so we basically offer machine learning solutions that help them sort out their legal deals in the best way possible. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you for expanding a little bit on that, Jero. Well, actually, each of you, when you think about it, in some ways is working to support business and economic development, something that's been so stunted, of course, except in certain industries in the last 9 months. But before we get into these challenges of the economy during and after the pandemic, tell us a little bit more. I think Jero has already done it, but what inspired you to get into this work? Maybe Yumi, can you say something about this? Because you're not speaking for your company, you can say yourself what you like about it. And everything I say, by the way, I'm saying for NYU Abu Dhabi and for myself. Okay, there we go.
Yeah, sure, of course. So as I mentioned, I mainly do public sector work, and that's actually, so I think I come from a little bit of a different angle than others. But that's, so I've always been interested in service, in working in a public sector role. And so when I was looking for, originally actually, so I majored in chemistry and I wanted to work on food insecurity. It's a major global issue. And I was thinking that I would be a researcher and that I would come up with some kind of really cool idea that could potentially help. And then I started thinking that maybe that isn't the only way to have an impact. And there's a lot of really amazing scientists and a lot of really amazing researchers out there doing really incredible work. And so maybe my role isn't necessarily research, but to help give those kinds of ideas and those advancements more of a platform from a business or a government support policy perspective. And so that's what got me really thinking about science policy, working in the government, and right now currently as a consultant that mainly focuses in the public sector. So it's always been driven by the sense of service, and right now I'm currently very blessed to be part of the team at Booz Allen, where we've been able to really work on some very interesting problems that are cross-cutting and very relevant to the current economic situation.
Well, it's true that for a private company, you can work in the public service. That is often misunderstood, but clearly that is your trajectory, which is very important today, especially. Abhijay, what brought you to work as essentially strategy consultant, right? And how does one get into that line of work, and what drew you to it?
I think there was a little bit of what Yumi said as well, right? Just kind of evaluating my role in if there is change to be made, where do I sit in it? I grew up as a tech enthusiast, right? I was a computer science kid. I was coding since I was 11 years old, and I studied computer science. But right around, I think my sophomore year at NYU Abu Dhabi, and this is again one of the reasons I love NYU Abu Dhabi, for the experience I had there. I was involved in starting a company, and what I thought was going to be just building the right tech and then going. It was an e-commerce startup based in Delhi, and we said, okay, fine, we're going to go build tech, and we're going to go and then sell to people, and people are going to want to buy from us. And what we realized very quickly is tech is great, tech is amazing, but there's so much that sits around it, because tech fundamentally is made to enable people and serve people, not the other way around. And I think that was a big switch for me, where I then I went on to work with Microsoft, where we were based in the Middle East, in their Egypt office, actually, helping them build tech to put youth back to jobs who had recently been displaced by the unrest in the area back in 2012, 2011. And I continued that team. It was just like, how do I solve problems? How do I figure out how tech can be an enabler? And consulting just happened to be one of the right places for me to be. I work at Accenture, which is fundamentally a technology company. And over the past 5 years, I've invested in their strategy capabilities. So it just felt like the right place to be. And that's how I got here. In terms of people who are looking to get into consulting, I would personally say that I think from what I understand, NYU AD has a growing batch of interested students who are looking to get into consulting. So there's clubs on campus, there are opportunities that are starting to open up in the region. And what a lot of them have started already doing is actually connecting with a lot of us alumni and making sure that the alumni networks are strong. So I think it's just about kind of looking around at NYU Abu Dhabi and just tapping into the networks and the opportunities. And there is a way forward.
Yeah, I think your perspective is a really empathetic one to say, you know, the technology we have is after all made by people, for people, with people. It's only as good as what people can do with it in the end. And so that's a wonderful perspective. Lola, what set you off on your journey that led you to VentureSouk?
Well, my journey was not as direct. I was one of those people that explored pretty much everything I could. I really wanted to learn about everything. And so I think all the experiences that I had at NYU Abu Dhabi were very shaping. It's true that from high school, I always had a sense of giving back to communities that I was part of, but I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I think I majored in economics and I really enjoy finance, but I, explored different parts. So I started my freshman year interning for a foundation back home where they said, okay, we need to evaluate the impact that these funds are having for these programs. So let's look at this. And so that's where I had this very focused experience and very where I could see a really direct impact on people of my community, right? And then I went on the more traditional finance internships and jobs in consulting and investment banking, which I also really enjoyed. And then it led up to me in my senior year saying, okay, so what do we do? And I asked one of my fellow classmates, can we combine something as stimulating in terms of finance thinking as investment banking with something that creates social or environmental impact? And they said, have you heard about impact investing? And I said, no. So that was an entire year where I spent researching and just talking to people. It happened that VentureSouk posted an internship and I joined them. And in the end, they were going to launch one of their theses, which is around technology and its impact, its social and environmental impact. And that's when I joined the team and everything worked out in the end.
Very interesting journey. I want to stay with you for a moment, Lola, and ask you whether you think impact investing has been especially negatively impacted by the pandemic, as people, the first thing they think is, oh, the economy, how do we bring any job back at all? And let's forget about trash as we get deliveries to our house and things like that. Do you think it's harder for impact investors to see a way out of the pandemic? How has it affected your business?
I think it's been the opposite for us, because I think 2020, even before the pandemic, it started with a very large global consciousness of there's a climate crisis. And that's how 2020 started, with big financial players saying there's a very big climate risk happening. So when the pandemic hit, it is true, there are a lot of negative impacts, such as the deliveries or all the plastic masks that people are just using, right? But I think that there has been a shift in both the investor mindset, the entrepreneur mindset, and the consumer mindset, towards a more conscious, either environmental or socially conscious way of looking at the world. Right? We have seen how the impact of the stop in flights, or consumers are also being more aware of, okay, where is this tomato that I am eating right now from, or how does my clothes, where do my clothes end up, right? So I think it has been a net positive outcome. I just really hope that this global consciousness that has arisen stays this way.
Well, I agree with you, and I hope so too. These problems haven't gone away, and I hope that investment in those ventures, which is what you're in, of course, that will continue apace. Let me ask something about economic opportunities today. And this is really for anyone to answer. You can maybe raise your hand if you want to start. Anyone could have a view of this, I think, and Lola has already spoken to this. Are there economic opportunities that have come out of the pandemic? Are there actually industries that have seen growth in various ways, expansion into other markets, increased revenues? I'd love your views of that.
I can start.
Start, please.
Yeah, I think at the fundamental level, right, if you're looking at the world at 30,000 feet view level, there's a series of macro trends that are happening. And if you look at those macro trends from an industry point of view, and this data would be about a few months old, things are changing very rapidly in today's world. But you have the financial services industry, which has kind of taken a hit a little bit when you think about the consumer insurance and banking side of things. But you have the capital markets industry within financial services, some of which has gone up, some of which has gone down. So there's been a net negative, I would say. Then you have your resources industry, right? So your resources would have your utilities companies, but everybody uses standard utilities. But then again, you have your oil and gas players like the BPs, the Shells, the Totals of the world. They're having a bit of a hard time just because people have stopped traveling as much as they used to. You move on, and then you have the next industry, which is consumer goods, right? So within that, you have the retail sector, the shopping that we do, the clothes we buy. Up until recently, they were seeing a downturn, but over the last month or so, especially with the surge of the Black Friday sales and the Christmas shopping that's come back up, it's seen positive movement. However, what the bigger players have been your grocery shops and big companies that are actually providing you your work from home meals and the fact that you're cooking more. You move on, and this is where the things start looking up. So you have the comms, the media, the technology, right? Your media providers like the Netflixes of the world, your companies that provide internet, the fact that you're on the phone all the time, those companies, they have seen massive, massive growth, and there's so much within that sits. And lastly, you have people that are in your health and public services, and that industry has seen growth in a way that it's been quite strained, both from a pharmaceutical angle when you are basically selling more drugs than you have ever before because people are so worried, but also from a public services point of view when you're trying to essentially fight through this pandemic as a country, as a locality, as a city. So I think there's that macro view to first put on industries. And then there's from a consumer point of view, right? There's another one where three big things are happening. Number one, your people are staying at home. And that's basically shifting value pools, right? So money that people would have spent going to their office, where the office would have spent money on the commercial real estate, they would have gone out for drinks right after work, they would have contributed to the transport economy. Those things are shifting away from the office to the home. And I think the recent study that actually Accenture did, that's about $2 trillion US annually that's going to be at risk. Secondly, people have started traveling less, and what that really means is that they're not traveling less, they're flying less. And that means that things like internal tourism, that means things like digital entertainment go up. And there's an additional 300 to 400 billion at stake, which is just being taken away and being put into different places. And more than that, the last one, which is the biggest one, is discretionary spend. I don't think it's going to come as a surprise to anybody. People are spending less, right? People are worried about what's going to happen with their job security, whether they're going to have a roof over their head. And they've been estimates that that's around 600 to 700 billion additional, which is at risk, which is not just value shifting from one place to another, which is actually money that probably won't be pumped into the economy like it would have been last year. And that's where economic opportunities lie, and what worries policymakers and what worries the CEOs of companies on whether they're going to survive this pandemic or not. I don't know if that's helpful, but I think that's just the way I kind of like position it at a very high level.
Well, that's a beautiful matrixed answer indeed, with these differential impacts on different industries. I think it probably is fair to say that indeed people who could afford to stay at home and work at home bought more stuff at home. So for for consumer spending actually is up again, interestingly, especially in the United States, that I follow a little bit more in Europe. But it really has hit the services economies. And since so many economies ultimately are service economies these days, I think that's where you see that really heavy impact on jobs. I think that is true. But yes, travel, I mean, it will come back in some form, but for the moment, indeed, I think that's where some of the biggest hits have been. Yumi, what do you think? Do you think there are some economic opportunities coming out of the pandemic where industries
Yes,
maybe haven't been hit as
certainly.
bad?
So I've been paying attention mainly to two areas. The first one being cybersecurity, which so with the massive shift to work from home, all of a sudden your attack surface has ballooned because people are using personal devices. I know in the beginning of the pandemic, especially, companies hadn't planned to have everybody dispersed, and so people didn't have their firm managed devices at that point. You've got children who sometimes have access to your work phones or other devices. There's just a lot of new variables. And so I've seen that, at least among the cyber circles, thinking of solutions to improve resilience in cybersecurity now that everybody's dispersed and using their own devices for work has been a really big thing. Also, there's been a corresponding growth in the prevalence of cyber bad actors using COVID as a way to target people through malware, phishing, that kind of thing. And so it is sort of this evolving threat that's also gotten a lot of attention. But the other thing about it too is that a lot of this was already existing. There were plans to shift to more of a digital format. There were plans in a lot of places to start increasing flexibility. There was trends towards that. And the pandemic, essentially what it did was to accelerate the timeline significantly. And so while there may have been plans, those plans were several years in the making, and suddenly it had to be compressed into a month. And so that's been a massive challenge, but also a very big opportunity. And the other area that I've been focusing on, thinking about a lot, is resilience, emergency management. So every time we have some kind of global crisis, all of a sudden people start paying attention again, and that's great. The thing is, and so we start thinking, oh, we have to make sure we can prevent this from happening again. And we saw that happen in 2008. We saw that in 2014 with the Ebola crisis, and now we're seeing it happen again here. And so every time we experience some kind of major crisis, people think, oh, we need a plan for this. We need to prevent this from happening again. But the nature of planning in advance is that when the risk is too long-term and it's not definite and it's not concrete, it's one of those easy things to sort of put off, or maybe to trade off for something more immediate. So like if your firm isn't doing so well and you need to balance your spending, the first thing that tends to go is this type of long-term planning for indefinite risks. And so one thing that I'd really hope to see is that people have seen the devastating impact that the pandemic can have on businesses and on people. And hopefully, maybe this time it'll stick, and this type of long-term planning can hopefully be maintained even after this, the impacts are no longer as immediately felt.
Hope springs eternal with me, Yumi. And I agree with you that if you look back, there was a great book, right, on the history of the pandemic of 1917 that coincidentally came out last year. I don't think we learned a lot from it. It's really interesting. As a historian, I am skeptical of how well we absorb these lessons and then use them again, also because the world evolves. And so certain things are also sometimes better. You've all spoken about technology, and it really has, as hard as it's been, it's also really sort of saved us at the same time. So, yes, long-term planning may soon go again. Focus on changing public health and how we run that. There may be some longer-term impacts there. I hope so. Jero, I was wondering about startups, since you've been thinking about startups and been involved with them. As we heard Abhijay say so clearly, you know, these bigger companies, think Amazon, Apple, Google, Facebook, they've done just fine, right? And certain other providers, and they've really been dominating the global economy even more than they already did, you could say. Well, many of these smaller and mid-sized companies that make cities and countries and so forth have had to close or had to have very significant layoffs and very significant losses. What do you think? How do you see the future for startups and small businesses?
I mean, it will be very hard to generalize, especially when it comes to startups, because each one of them sort of is acting in its own sort of realm, and so you have to be very like industry or vertical specific when you're talking about them, because some of those same startups that you're mentioning have seen like a meteoric rise in their stock throughout the year. If at this time last year you had bet your money that remote working technologies were going to see such a high jump in terms of usage and in terms of how vital they have become to the working place, you would have become a millionaire by now, or even a billionaire. It's also interesting because you see, for example, a firm like Tesla, in the midst of the harshest pandemic that we've seen, Tesla stock has pretty much quadrupled over that same amount of time. And it's also interesting when you look at a company like Samsung, for example. It's not a startup; it's a huge company worldwide, but their Q3 revenues were over 50 billion, and they've even surpassed what they earned last year at this time. And so it tells you how industry specific really matters in this specific case, because startups in general have received or have taken a big hit. And even in terms of fundraising, you know, startups usually would be able to go to their investors or to go to investors meetings in different countries to be able to sort of have those deals closed down. But the fact that the pandemic has come has even impeded upon that, and therefore has caused many startups whose cash cycle is very short to in fact just shut down. And that has taken a huge hit, especially in well, I'll look at it from like a more sort of local view, but looking at Senegal and looking at West African economies in general, where the informal sector really accounts for up to 70% of the economy, a lot of small businesses have had to close down. And I was discussing it the other day with a friend of mine who was visiting me. But the reality here is that the economic crisis is even more acute than the health crisis here, because we've lost more people sort of going through the illegal immigration route because of economic despair than people we've lost due to the COVID crisis. And it speaks volumes to how important the survival of those small startups is to the overall economy, like you mentioned. And I guess one last thing I would mention is recently, at least in the startup world, there has been the acquisition of Slack, so one of the remote working technologies app by Salesforce for an amount of $27 billion, which is insane in the time we're living in. But that, again, just speaks volume to how a startup that was founded just 7 years ago in 2012, 2013, has arrived to the point where it's that much valued. And I think going forward, that again speaks to how we will have more and more flexible sort of work arrangements going into 2021, 2022, and how that's going to become so important. And cybersecurity as well, like you mentioned, in the global work environment.
I want to go back to say more about tech in a minute, talk more about tech in a minute, but I saw Lola, who's of course so involved with startups, nodding very much while you were speaking, Jero. And Lola, tell us a little bit how you think about the role of startups and whether there will be sufficient appetite to invest in them, whether there will be hesitation as we slowly come out of this economy. The economy will probably lag a little bit, right? Behind the pandemic health recovery. How are you thinking about that?
Well, I think the best startups come out of crisis. It is the perfect environment to just brew ideas because on one hand you have resources available both in terms of human labor and also in terms of technology. Even, I mean, maybe not in the COVID era, but maybe in terms of like offices are cheaper. Resources in general tend to be cheaper in economic recessions, and it's been proven. For example, Slack was the result of like the previous economic crisis, right?
Yes.
And many of those startups that we see, um, and I think it's the perfect brew. Um, a lot of people are looking at technology startups to solve these challenging problems that COVID has faced. And I think for us, at least here where I sit, we've seen it very clearly. And for all these SMEs who need to be here and power the economy, there's been a shift to digital. So for during March, April, May, June, even up until now, you've seen an entire like an entire sector that was cash based. I mean, I still paid, I don't know, my water on cash, or I went to the supermarket and I paid in cash. And in a matter of 30, 60 days, it was digitize or die. That was it. And so I think that has a positive effect to startups that are trying to innovate via technology, because that is just educating a big sector of a big chunk of the population. Either it's if consumers, if you're looking from like the user standpoint, or sellers if you're looking from like the SME standpoint, to be comfortable and with technology. So I think it's fantastic. I hope that I think that technology startups are going to be invested in and for a long time. Yeah.
Can I add to that,
If I
Mariët?
Yeah,
can
please,
just add one thought.
Yeah, please, Yero and then Abhijit. Go ahead.
Yeah, so with the startup that I work with personally, I mean, we're a legal tech startup, so we look at the type of clauses that are included in most of the contracts that those PE firms sort of encounter when they close their M&A deals. And one thing that has been sort of noticed as a trend is that more and more, in terms of those clauses in contracts, you'll see more and more investor aggressive clauses, because the pandemic has sort of shown that there is a huge uncertainty, or there's huge risk when you take your money and invest into a startup or into something that's not necessarily certain to succeed. And so investors are putting in more and more clauses, such as the MAC clauses. That stands for Material and Adverse Changes clause. You also have liquidation preferences that are changing. And so investors want terms that are more sort of profitable to them, or that are more reassuring to them. And that's sort of that does not benefit, in most of the cases, startups who in this instance are on the other receiving hand. So I just wanted to put that in there, just to sort of like stress how that investing sort of landscape is shifting towards a more investor favored environment.
Which could in the end be also a disincentive to people to go into startups, though. If it becomes harder, you get less out of it less easily. Anyway, Abhijit, you had an interesting commenting on this.
I mean, there were so many interesting things, and I just wanted to start picking up on that and actually bringing them to life, because this year, and I've been now graduated for as long as I was in NYU Abu Dhabi and as a consultant, and I think I have not done more interesting work than I have this year. So Yumi talked about a really interesting point, that the digital agenda has always been there, right? And depending on which consulting firm you talk about, some say the digital disruption era is over and now it's time to deliver on it. Some say it's still around, but that's just depending on who you talk to. I'll give you an interesting example. And I was working with a client back in April. So it was just the pandemic had just happened. And we were originally called in to say, listen, we have, they were a comms company. So basically provide mobile phones and internets and whatnot. And they said, we have invested in an online store like everybody else out there in the world. But and it kind of looks nice and we kind of have the operations, but currently only 5 to 6% of our sales go through it. And that kind of defeats the purpose, because the reason you need to invest in an online store is so that the cost of doing business goes lower. So you basically derive the benefits of moving away from physical to digital. And we were like, great, we were bought in. We were doing a very short piece of work, about 3 to 4 weeks, to help them understand how to drive more traffic from their stores to this. And then 3 weeks in, they came in and they said, well, we had a chat with the CEO. We're not going to open our physical stores when the pandemic stops. And we were like, wow, that's just crazy. And imagine this organization, which would have normally spent the next 5 to 6 years ramping down their physical operations, just took that decision within a 3-week period. And things start blowing out of proportion for them. There was another client I was working with, which sells products that are vaping products that are regulated by age. And they had the same issue over the period of the pandemic. I remember seeing the numbers. It was a flat graph up until January, and their online channel just went straight steeply up and kept going up every month. And one of the biggest issues they had is, well, people can now buy from us online, and that's great because we always wanted them to. But what's our responsibility to them as a seller? We don't want to sell to people underage. What are the things that we can do in order to make sure that we are responsibly doing our business? And I think that whole agenda, which would have normally happened over this 5 to 6 year horizon, these are the decisions they've had to make very quickly. So that's number one. Number two is a very interesting point that Lola made, and she differentiated startups from SMEs. And I think there is a bit of confusion, at least has been in my head, about what startups do and what SMEs do and how they overlap. So I think fundamentally companies like the ones Hero works in, or companies like the one Lola invests in, they are technology first startups. They basically look at a value chain of, this is how today the world works. Let's pick it apart and let's make sure that we're doing a good job. They have their sets of challenges with the ones that you talked about. But I think what we often miss out, and these are tech first startups, what we often miss out are SMEs, who are tech enabled startups. And I'll give you an example from India. So I mentioned earlier that I was involved in building up an e-commerce business, and we eventually ended up being a jewelry brand. Now, when all of a sudden, when you're a jewelry brand, basically you're a retailer who sells jewelry, and that jewelry is sold through the online channel rather than being sold in store. Now, if you look at a country like India, retail, a good percentage, and I don't have exact numbers, so I'm not going to even venture putting a number. Good amount of retail happens through these SMEs. But when you actually force, hello?
I think we're missing you a little bit, Abhijay. I think I'm not the only one. Can you say something again?
Okay?
We'll see how it goes.
Is it okay now?
Yes, better, much better.
Okay. So I don't know where I got cut off, but I'm just going to go with it. The SMEs who basically used to sell in a store, and the reason that they were able to sell is because a number of people walk outside their store and they can invite them in, all of a sudden are competing online. And when they compete online, they compete with the likes of the H&Ms, the Zaras, or the large companies, which have such deep pockets that they don't only spend it on marketing spends and whatnot, they also can just provide the cheapest product at the best quality. So those people are the biggest ones that are struggling right now. And I don't know the answer for this, but I think there's a big question mark on how they will survive the next 6, 12, and 18 months going forward.
So several of you, that's helpful. We caught really the very most of that, Abhijay. So for the most part, though, several of you have talked about the positive effects of technology. And of course, it's hard to deny that we've been able to do certain things very fast, like developing the science of the coronavirus thanks to the internet and genomics technology. Obviously, the communications technology, Slack, or you've mentioned Zoom, all these technologies. Looking forward, using your NYU Abu Dhabi brains that you have, who are the losers in the digital economy to come if we don't watch out? who are at risk of not benefiting in the longer term? Who wants to speak? I think I see Yumi and maybe Lola. I think everybody also talks to Yumi. You start.
Yeah, I think so it's a big access question, I think. And also, so people who have challenges in accessing for whatever reason, socioeconomic, or they just live somewhere where it's not profitable for these large ITC firms to provide connectivity. Even in the US, like I was actually reading about like rural internet access, and you'd think it's the US, they're building out 5G infrastructure, and yet there's people who don't even have dial-up. So the level of inequality, even in highly advanced economies, is even further exacerbated because it's becoming more and more an access issue. So I worry about that as a consequence, where when access becomes a barrier to entry in the first place, then you're creating more and more like permanent boundaries between socioeconomic classes. The other thing that I would think about is just people who work in jobs that are not easily transformed into a digital context. So I'm very privileged as a consultant who's been working from home, that I've been able to more or less do my job the same way that I did, just through a screen instead of face to face. And that is an incredible privilege to have. On the other hand, there are plenty of people I mean, even for example, my dad is in the food service industry, and you can't automate his job, and it can't be done over a screen. He has to go in and do things in person. And that's just something where, sure, the advancements in technology do help. It was something where like he was able to start accepting card payments instead of having to rely on a really lengthy invoicing process. But those kinds of sectors are the ones where I think we need to be really conscious, and I always come at this from a regulatory or like a government perspective. So when we're creating conditions for an economy to grow, to make sure that there is support for these kinds of industries, so that they aren't forgotten in the rush to become digital.
Yeah.
Who I think Lola, you were interested in weighing in on this.
Yeah, and absolutely, I agree with Yumi. I think in the current economic system, there tends to be the winners and losers, right? And we've seen that with technology, we've seen that with education. Like when everyone shifted to online education, everyone assumed that everyone had access to bandwidth, but clearly a lot of people didn't. We've seen that also with climate change. Clearly, people in lower income neighborhoods have been suffering a lot more from the outcomes of climate change than the rest. And so I 100% agree with Yumi on this one. I wanted to raise another type of loser that we need to be wary of, and I think it's all of us. Because there's a big question for me, and I really have not cracked it down. I'm still thinking about it, about the new data economy. So this entire technology and data economy is based on like large amounts of data that, if they're not used ethically, then we're just going to find ourselves in another crisis, whether it's via security crisis, whether it's via identity crisis, whether it can take so many forms. So we need to think about how to handle data ethically moving forward.
That's a very macro view of everyone losing. I think you're right. Eero.
Yes, they've made absolutely great points. I mean, I'll touch upon a few, but I'll start, by taking the conversation a bit on the social side of things, because I think this pandemic has absolutely rewritten our social contract with each other. Lola has mentioned that's a key point: data protection and data security again and again. It's even like a state concern level. I mean, when you have the U.S. government sort of banning TikTok, as an app, because it's been pretty much the most used app of 2020. There's huge threats there, and that's very important. Another thing that Yumi has mentioned, which I think was very relevant, because even when I came back to Senegal, I've had to sort of become a part-time teacher to my younger siblings, is that the fact of not being able to study through remote technologies, because for here in Senegal, I mean, apart from like classes that were in national exam classes, all classes have had to stop for 6 to 7 months. And so that was a huge break, because I had to basically become a teacher and assist my younger siblings in their lesson, just to keep that consistency and sort of get them ready for when school started again. And so schools have been closed from last March to early November, and that's huge. That's a huge amount of lost, opportunity as well there. And I think on a bigger scale, what this pandemic has shown us is that there are many deficiencies in our social political policies, whether on a health level or on an economic level. And Yumi has mentioned again that the economic disparity is absolutely massive, and this pandemic has just exacerbated that. And so hopefully with the renewed administration, at least in the US, and the new changes that we're going forward in 2021, I think two main questions at least pop in my head. The first one being, can we see this as an opportunity, like a glass half full, to rebuild our economies and start adopting a more sustainable approach in how we design policies at the state level, really, to make sure that even in the state of a pandemic, you don't have like first responders or people who actually are braving curfew or lockdown just to go work and be able to provide for their families, while you have millionaires in their private islands, or I don't know, in their yachts, just sort of taking it easy till things come back down to a normal. And the other thing is this really like the end of capitalism as we know it, or is it just gonna get worse? Because just 2-3 days ago, we were seeing the fact that on the California, I think, Future Trades Index, water was going to start being traded as a commodity, which is absolutely insane, because water at the very basis is what we as humans need to live. And so these are, again, big questions to be thrown out there, but there is a lot of, I think, social economic impact that needs to be discussed about how we want to build our economies going forward, how we want the social policies our leaders enact, guiding us forward. That's super important.
Great comment, Jero. I do want to say, teachers will inherit the earth. So thank you what you did for your family members. It's so important helping them learn. Really, there's very interesting economic impact studies underway of the losses in learning and what they amount to, and how many people will be almost permanently behind by losing just a year or even a semester. It is very dramatic. So we need a new economy. I'm going to quickly ask each of you, because I know Abhijay will have to go very soon. If you could given that we need to build a new economy back better, I think it really is true. If you could give one piece of advice to business leaders or political leaders, especially as a young person still starting out in your career, one piece of advice that would get us to that better moment, or in some aspect make this a more equitable and sustainable economy for the world, what would it be? Abhijay, why don't we start with you? What would you say? And you can say which leader it would be if you have a specific leader you want to say it to.
I don't have a specific leader in mind, but the response to the question is kind of linked to what I was going to say to Jero.
Good.
And I'm going to start with that first. I think one of the key things of building economies back, in my view, is understanding the point we made around value shift, right? So what are the things that are not going to exist anymore in the next 3-5 years? And what are the new things that are going to exist? And actually, how do you retrain the people or the workforce who are going to be in those industries, right? If today you are in a services industry that's not going to exist in 3 months, the skills that you have are not going to be valid in 3 months from now. And then you're going to have a hard time finding a job, and you're going to kind of go into this vicious cycle. So at the very core of it, and that's probably going to be my advice to, like you say, the leaders or leaders of state, is that can you invest in the upskilling of people, the workforce of your country, into the right next thing, because things are going to start changing very rapidly. And if you don't get ahead of that, you're going to be very, very far behind.
Yeah.
Good advice. Yumi, what do you think? What would you say?
I'd say to be empathetic, to understand that not everybody comes from the same place of privilege and is able to give as much as everybody else. I see this a lot. I see a rising, what we call grind culture. And I think active measures from leadership at an organizational level, or even at a more macro level, to think of workers and employees as more than just vehicles of productivity, and also to understand that you don't that someone who is struggling should not have to explain their pain to get the empathy that they need to be able to do a good job. I think that level of empathy is going to be really important moving forward, because everybody has been impacted by the pandemic.
Thank you. Lola.
I think I'm gonna build a bit on what Yumi said about empathy, and I'm gonna encourage leaders to actually take the first step, because I think there are a lot of well-intended thoughts, but not a lot of people want to act on them, maybe because they don't see other people taking that initiative, or they say, this is never gonna work. It will work, and we can achieve that sustainability in the economy and in business once everyone takes the first step. So why don't you go ahead and take the first step?
Empathy, initiative, leadership, upskilling. Yero, what would you say? If you
I think
grab a
the
leader,
leader I had in mind sort of embodies all of the points they brought up, and that's Jacinda Ardern. I think she's impressed me the most amongst world leaders when it came to how she sort of put herself in terms of handling the pandemic and being empathetic, because that's extremely important. As a leader, you have to sort of be that guiding light, and I think she absolutely embraced that role and embodied it perfectly. And I think it's extremely important, again, because this year will be remembered for the many social changes and the social movements that have happened throughout it, alongside the pandemic. And I think that sort of empathetic leadership, that sort of care is desperately needed. And I hope that 2021 and the years that will be coming afterwards, and the leaders that will be coming afterwards, will have that in their mental, and will have that in their leadership.
thank you so much for lifting up that's still very useful woman leader for our time. One last question. It's such a great conversation. I could listen to you all night, but we have to close this off soon because you have other jobs and responsibilities to go to. But just because we've been reflecting so much at NYU Abu Dhabi about our 10th anniversary year, what is one piece of advice, again, a quick piece of advice you would give to students at NYU Abu Dhabi today, those who've come after you? Abhijay, please.
I don't think I can say this enough, but it's just soak it in. There's so much diversity. There's so much that's going on in this very small campus. And I think just because I remember from my time at NYU Abu Dhabi, just because I was surrounded by so much greatness all the time, I just almost forgot about the fact that it doesn't exist everywhere else. So just take it in, because those connections, those people, those experiences still continue to serve me. And I think one of my proudest moments is the fact that in the past 3 years, there's not a single city I've been to, and this is on a random weekend trip or a proper holiday, where I either haven't been able to message an NYU Abu Dhabi friend and say, I need a couch, or actually run into them in a random airplane. And that's just an amazing feeling. So that would be my advice.
Soak it in. Yero, what would you say?
I think my advice will again resonate to the class of 2019, because I remember at our graduation speech, one of the main theme of the speech was resilience. And I don't think I've experienced resilience more than, I wish I'd experienced it much later in my career, but it came in 2020, so I had to face it. So I just wanna say to all the NYU AD students, current students, current fresh alums, and even older alums, that is extremely important. Just keep believing in who you are, in what you do, and in your core beliefs. And I think just always trust that if you're doing the right thing, like good things will come to you. And I just want to send a lot of positivity out there, because it's not easy times at all. And I hope everyone has a wonderful end to 2020 and looking forward to 2021.
We're looking forward to 2021, and we're feeling that positivity. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yumi, what would you tell students today?
Sure. I think a little bit in the vein of my previous response, I think just be kind to yourself. There's a lot going on, and it's okay if it's not easy. And I think something that happens is we get sucked into our problems, and it's really hard to see past them sometimes. And when I think about when I feel myself going down the path, I always think that I've got a long way to go. And my goal is still very far away, and that's okay. And there's a lot of different paths to eventually get to that goal. And if my path doesn't look like someone else's, that's okay. So I take a lot of comfort in the fact that we'll get there eventually, and how we get there, we'll learn from it, and it'll be okay. So just like a deep breath, be kind to yourself, take care of yourself before everything else, and you'll be, hopefully we'll all be okay.
Be kind and take care. And the goals may shift. You may not know what the goals are yet, right? That also changes. Lola,
Yes, exactly.
the last word from you for our students.
I think I resonate with all the messages. I think for me, some advice that I would like to give is stay curious. I think it's a challenge throughout this past year, but I think NYU Abu Dhabi is a magnificent community to just learn, both academically, both from the community, from your friends, from everywhere there, from everyone there. So I would encourage curiosity. Yes.
Curiosity and learning from each other, soaking it in, resilience, caring for yourself and others. You are just the best of NYU Abu Dhabi. It is so wonderful to hear from you and to hear your own spirit of resilience and creativity and your thoughtfulness. I really want to thank you for being so generous with your time and joining us. I know many who tuned in and will tune in later will really benefit from what you told us. Be well, be safe, and all the best for the new year. There are better times to come. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mariët.
Bye,
Thanks all.
everyone. Thanks
Bye-bye.
for joining us.
Bye, everyone.